Welcome back to the Exposure History channel. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more videos like this one. In the days before the modern plumbing system, water was something you had to work hard all day to get. On long walks to wells or rivers, women and children would drag heavy buckets and barrels on. This photograph defines the severity of life of the frontiers, where even the most basic needs had to be a now-and-then affair. This became a routine practice of the pioneer families due to the morning water run that defined the timetable of the day. It is a huge steam locomotive passing a high wooden bridge across a deep canyon in the late 1800s. These industrial giant iron men changed the West as they linked out-of-the-way towns with the rest of America. The construction of these bridges claimed the lives of many workers who would fall to death as they were constructing the bridge at dizzying heights. The railroad transformed isolated settlements across the frontier into a single country virtually overnight. One man is tall with a huge knife in his hand, looking at the camera. Tintype photographs were widely used in the 1870s since they were less costly and durable compared to the alternative process. He turns directly to make everyone notice his great weapon hanging on his body. Hunting, defense, and other daily frontier life activities required large knives as a crucial survival. One of the frontier sheriffs is seated with his feet raised, his hat tipped very low, in one of those brief intervals of quietness. He is just waiting to get in trouble, and that was inevitable sooner or later in Wild West towns. These rangers were always at risk of outlaws, drunks, and mobs, with practically no one to help them. And many of them never saw their retirement and died with their badges still on. The famous gunwoman Annie Oakley is quietly seated with her gun belt and her fringed costume in the performance dress. In the 1880s, she hit the stage in the Wild West show, performed by Buffalo Bill, where she astounded the audience all around the world. Her calm facial expression demonstrates the total confidence of who she is and what she can perform. Portraits such as this one brought her development into becoming one of the first female celebrity superstars in America. This late 1800s photograph features cowboys with their poses and their rifles and battered hats. They are working men, not the Hollywood versions we are accustomed to seeing and cleaning. They were mostly young ranch hands who were engaged in brutal work with barely enough money to survive. The old worn features and plain attire of them tell the real history of the strenuous frontier life. Three cowboys are willing to settle scores in the old-fashioned manner using cigars, whiskey, and loaded pistols. Fights over land, cows, gambling debts, or even over personal insults usually resulted in bloodshed on the frontier. The law was weak or completely absent in most areas, so men handled conflicts themselves. These negotiations frequently left someone wounded or dead in the dusty street outside. A crowded saloon is filled with locals holding drinks and is waiting to swap stories or to exchange punches. These were the backbone of the frontier towns, as they were bars, gambling halls, and social clubs. Violence was a common occurrence, with men consuming alcohol heavily after working hard all day. More people used to visit the saloons on Saturday nights than visit the churches on Sundays. During the California Gold Rush period, prospectors squat along streams with pans in search of gold. They pursued the hopes of hitting it rich and found in the main only disappointment and stiff backs. Thousands were coming west hoping that they would find it lucky, but found hard labor and false hopes. Fewer than 1% ever discovered real wealth, and the rest perished penniless and unremembered. James Brown Miller received the name due to his employment as a lawman as well as hired killer. When it was profitable, he would wear a badge, and when it suited him better, he would become an outlaw. By 1909, he had killed at least a dozen men, and perhaps dozens more when he was lynched by an infuriated mob. He was an ideal illustration of the extent of how thin the line between the law and crime was in the West. Tribal chiefs were there in full traditional garb in the 1880s and 1890s. This is a dignified picture of the native leaders as their people were rounded up into reservations. By now, the majority of tribes had lost wars and ancestral lands had been taken away. These portraits would oftentimes serve as the last document of cultures that were being erased intentionally by government policy. Cowboys participate in an early rodeo, demonstrating their riding and roping abilities to the audience. These contests began as unofficial events between ranch hands in which they competed on who was the best. By the 1880s, rodeos became organized entertainment just as the true cowboy era was ending. What began as practical ranch work transformed into the spectacular sport we recognize today. Dodge City has thousands of buffalo hides piled away on the ground in an endless line into the distance. This 1870s photograph is an indication of the tremendous killing that almost pushed buffalo to extinction to make money. Men can be seen among the piles posing like factory workers against their product that is to be shipment. It takes the ugly commercial aspect of the frontier that can never be replaced to save the whole plains ecosystem. There are 5 serious outlaws sitting in proximity to this classic 1900 Fort Worth studio photograph. Wild Bunch, headed by Butch Cassidy, and the Sundance Kid robbed banks and trains in the West. Each man wears a different style hat and shows a unique expression on his face. This portrait was taken shortly before several members fled to South America to escape pursuing lawmen. A wooden storefront stands closed and silent on an empty Tombstone street in the 1880s. Tombstone became famous for the 1881 gunfight at the OK Corral between lawmen and outlaws. One lone figure can be seen standing far in the distance down the dusty road. The photograph captures the town during its boom and bust mining days when violence ruled the streets. The plain white backgrounds of the modern series are opposed by working-class Westerners staring in the camera right in their face. In the 1970s and 1980s, photographer Richard Avedon made journeys through the American West to photograph real people. Their features are brown and worn and hardy with years of hard life. These commanding portraits demystify any romanticism to reveal the real individuals who made the West. In 1885 Arizona Territory, the settlers passed through the Gila River in buckboard wagons on a hazardous trip. One of the scariest experiences pioneers had when they were heading to the west to new homes was river crossing. Within seconds, fast currents would carry away wagons, horses, and whole families and drown them. In the absence of bridges, settlers waited to make crossings and hoped their wagons would remain dry in the swollen water. One of the riders is filling his water keg at a desert well, and his horse is drinking. Discovering water in the Arizona desert was a literal life or death matter to those on the road. Wells were frequently miles apart, and others were dry or defended with alkali, which killed cattle. Riders were forced to memorize all the places of water sources and have enough of them during dangerous stretches of empty routes. In 1886, a number of Apache prisoners were sitting at a rest stop near the Southern Pacific Railway. After years of resistance, these prisoners were being moved to remote reservations that were not close to their traditional homeland. The Apache Wars were about to conclude with the surrender of Geronimo, and the military was transferring whole tribes by train. Disease, starvation, and heartbreak at the loss of all they knew led to the demise of many prisoners during these forced journeys. This photograph of the year 1905 depicts 2 popular methods of transporting water in Old Mexico and the Southwest. One man is getting water buckets on a shoulder yoke, and another man is getting water through a burro. The daily use of water transport also took hours of work in the desert areas. The community that had no wells relied fully on these processes, and therefore water haulers were key employees in all towns. In 1900, a table of men were gambling over faro in a Bisbee saloon. The most popular game in the Wild West was the faro, and it was played in almost every saloon. Bisbee was a prosperous copper mining town in which miners even bet away on single-night paychecks. Dealers and players would cheat in the game, and this would result in accusations, fighting, and even fatal shootings. In Guthrie, Oklahoma, a new settler is looking to find a piece of land to occupy in a new town location. This was in the popular land rush of Oklahoma in 1889, when thousands of people rushed to acquire free land. Noon, April 22nd. A firearm opened the stampede, and 50,000 human beings crowded forward at the same instant. In one day, Guthrie passed through empty prairie to a city of 10,000. In 1889, the first blacksmith shop was ready to do business in newly established Guthrie, Oklahoma. This shop was constructed in days or weeks following the land rush, and it was absolutely necessary to survive. Blacksmiths crafted horseshoes, mended wagons, produced tools, and made hardware that the desperate settlers needed now. A frontier town without a blacksmith just could not exist and develop into something permanent. Land in a new California territory was auctioned off inside a tent in 1904 to eager buyers. These land sales attracted speculators, farmers, and businessmen hoping to buy valuable property cheaply and get rich. Auctions were often chaotic events with bidding wars, fraud claims, and fierce disputes over property boundaries. Many people lost their entire life savings buying worthless land based on lies from dishonest land companies. Crews constructed a railroad track on desert prairie, forever altering the frontier. The construction of the Transcontinental Railroad was characterized by gruesome labor by the Chinese and Irish immigrants who were subjected to deplorable conditions. Accidents, diseases, and wars against native tribes protecting their own country claimed thousands of lives. These railroads killed buffalo herds and brought the traditional native lifestyle to an end. This is a 1880s photograph which depicts Calamity Jane taking a fearless pose with her rifle in her hands, Martha Jane Cannery. She was living precisely what she desired in a world that was that of men. As a scout, freight driver, and Wild West show performer, she has defied all rules to be a woman. Both her hard life and her excessive drinking turned her into the image of frontier liberation and revolt. Here is a saloon entertainer in plain utilitarian dress about 1890, which is not like the glitzy film outfits. The actual dancers of the dance hall were dressed in simple clothes and not in showgirl costumes as Hollywood made up many years later. These were the women who had hard lives in the rough areas where there were drunk and violent men. The majority of them were compelled to work because there were only a few alternatives to extreme poverty. In this infrequent portrait of about 1879 or 1880, Henry McCarty holds his rifle. He died at the tender age of 21 as Billy the Kid, one of the most famous outlaws in the West. Before being shot, he was believed to have killed 8 men in the bloody Lincoln County War in New Mexico. It was his brave character and a tragic premature death that made him a legend that lives to this day. In the 1880s or 1890s, timber workers were on a break with an argument over cards. Even in the Wild West, relaxation time was dramatic and threatened by violence. Isolated danger zones were logging camps where employees worked unlimited hours with pathetic wages. Gambling, drinking, and fistfights were the only entertainment after brutal days cutting timber in remote mountains. In 1890, the Mesquite Business District, Texas, depicted active wagons with a population of less than 150. This small town had great aspirations of becoming something bigger than its small origins. Small communities in the frontiers fought tooth and nail to lure railroads, companies, and new settlers to their death. Most of them turned into ghost towns, but a few, such as Mesquite, turned out to be successful modern cities. Lewis and Clark County Jail was a recently constructed one that is on standby in Helena, Montana, circa 1874. This austere structure serves to remind us that even the Wild West had places to imprison troublemakers. Frontier jails were usually shanty wooden buildings which inmates could easily get out of with minimal effort. Helena was a gold boom town, and crime and shootings and vigilante justice were the order of the day. 4 Navajo horsemen rode across the amazing Cañon del Muerto, Arizona in 1905. This magnificent arm of Canyon de Chelly demonstrates the strong attachment of the Navajos with the land. At the time, the Navajo had been driven out to reservations, following violent clashes and the dreadful long walk. These were the hardships, but they retained their culture and a sense of attachment to these sacred places as this canyon. In the 1880s, there was a celebration by the Tombstone, Arizona locals, where they were roasting a pig to celebrate the opening of their new firehouse. It was a real frontier party when all the community was united at one table and celebrating. The danger of fire was unceasing and fatal in the towns of the West, which were wholly of wood and canvas. An adequate firehouse guaranteed more security and indicated that the wild mining town was becoming more permanent. Theodore Roosevelt examined the Dakota Badlands in the later days of 1885 prior to his presidential election in 1901. He arrived in the West as a young man, heartbroken by the death of his wife and mother on the same day. Roosevelt ranched, hunted, and lived hard in the Badlands, experiences that shaped his conservation policies later. He sought adventure and healing in America's wildest corners through frontier hardship and solitude. The very first house on the present site of Dodge City, Kansas, built in August 1872. Dodge City would become one of the most famous Wild West towns, known for violence and legendary lawmen. This simple structure was the beginning of what became a major cattle shipping center and frontier boomtown. By the mid-1870s, Dodge City earned its reputation as the wickedest little city in America. It is a poker game between 1887 and 1889 at a ranch owned by John Doyle in Arizona. Ranch life was secluded and lonely, and therefore such social events such as these were big entertainments to everybody. Poker games would continue throughout the night, and the bets were made in both money and other forms, such as horses, cattle, or land. These games of friendship were not without violence, as sometimes indignant accusations of fraud flew across the poker table. A bar shot in a bar at the Table Bluff Hotel and Saloon in California in 1889. The frontier drinking place is depicted by the long wooden bar, shelves for placing bottles, and plain furniture. In tiny remote areas in the West, saloons acted as hotels, restaurants, post offices, and social centers. The level of violence was so high that most bars had loaded weapons behind the counter to protect themselves in case of violence. Founding of Anadarko demonstrates an auction going on at a lumber company booth, August 8, 1901. There are temporary bank buildings and the first signs of a lodging house as the new town is coming together. This was the other land opening in Oklahoma, where white settlers were given Native American reservation lands. At one time, whole towns were literally constructed within a matter of days, with thousands of people claiming their spots and setting up businesses instantly. Frontier 1898. Men are putting down track on a new railroad line linking the wild frontier to civilization in Arizona. Laying crews labored in the scorching deserts under crude equipment, dropping miles of rail daily. These were primarily Chinese and Irish immigrants who were discriminated against, had pathetic wages, and were always in a dangerous situation. Most of them died because of accidents, heat strokes, or because they were attacked by native tribes whose lands the railroads trespassed. A family poses with their covered wagon during the Great Western Migration in Nebraska, 1886. These prairie schooners carried everything a family owned across thousands of miles of dangerous, unknown territory. The journey west took months, and families faced disease, starvation, terrible accidents, and occasional attacks. Children often walked beside the wagons for hundreds of miles because wagons were too full of supplies. Cowboys round up huge herds over the open range in the daily grind of the 1870s and 1880s. These extended drives were the pillar of the Wild West economy and cowboy myth. The drives would take months, carrying thousands of cattle hundreds of miles to railroad shipping towns. Cowboys endured stampede, crossing perilous rivers, bad weather, and attack as they made approximately $1 a day. The land rush in May 1889 in Guthrie, Oklahoma Territory, sees the jail circled by its residents. There is also justice and revenge as citizens of the town make the law their own. The mobs of the frontier often illegally hanged the alleged criminals without trial, where legal processes appeared slow or weak. In newly settled places where there was little or no real law enforcement or a corrupt police force, vigilante justice was the rule. In 1876, the blacksmith shop of the Silver King Mine in Arizona, where tools were continually being created by sparks. Blacksmiths were also key employees who ensured mining operations were running smoothly by creating and repairing instruments on a daily basis. The Silver King was able to bring millions of dollars of silver out of the Arizona desert. The mining towns were fully reliant on the blacksmiths to make the equipment that dragged riches out of the underground. In 1872, Sister Blandina went through the Wild West alone as a Catholic nun on a mission. She looked after the ill, erected schools, and even took on Billy the Kid with courage alone. It required superhuman courage to work with miners, cowboys, outlaws, and the Native Americans across Colorado and New Mexico. Her courageous devotion was so respected that even the toughest of criminals had to be her guardians on the way on her travels. A frontier woman poses in a photography studio holding a pistol in her lap confidently. During the 1880s and 1890s, many Western women learned to shoot for protection and hunting. She stares straight ahead with a fearless look, showing the toughness women needed to survive harsh conditions. Studio portraits like this were expensive, proving people wanted to display their strength and independence proudly. The finding party and their horses are on hot, slick rocks of the Navajo Mountain on their way to Rainbow Bridge. This 1909 expedition was in search of the huge natural bridge that the Native Americans had long been aware of. One of the largest natural bridges in the world is Rainbow Bridge, which was sacred to local tribes. It was discovered by white explorers in the year 1909, even though the Navajo had made visits to this sacred place since time immemorial. At the Gros Ventre Camp, Fort Belknap Reservation, Montana, a dog is being cooked in a cooking pot. Some Plains tribes traditionally consumed dog meat at ceremonies or when more common food was not available. By 1906, Native Americans in reservations were in appalling poverty and near starvation because animals like buffalo were exterminated and government ration was inefficient. Numerous tribes found it very difficult to preserve the customary ways of doing things when they were languishing in reservations with very few means. In September 1885, Geronimo and his band of Apache warriors captured 11-year-old Jimmy McKinn. Jimmy was bitterly resisting being brought home to his family when the Indians were briefly captured in March 1886. He was taken in a photo with the Indians prior to the ultimate surrender of Geronimo into the military. Jimmy had already assimilated into the Apache life in 6 months, an indication how some of those who were captured favored the native society. A cowboy who is ready to use a lasso looks outside the herd to his fellow cowboys who are waiting on the horizon. Cattle roundups occurred twice a year to collect, brand, and enumerate cattle scattered throughout large open lands. Cowboys had to work the entire day in the saddle, sorting cattle in clouds of choking dust. By 1902, the open range era was fading away, with the free grasslands being subdivided with barbed wire fences. Cowboys worked together branding calves on a Montana ranch in the late 1800s or early 1900s. Branding was hot, dangerous work where calves were roped, thrown down, and marked with red-hot irons. Each ranch had its own unique brand registered legally to prove ownership of their cattle. Cattle theft was common, so brands were essential proof, and rustlers who changed brands could be hanged. Coaches and buckboard wagons go past and over the steep S-shaped part of the Pike Carriage Road in Colorado. This perilous highway went up more than 14,000 feet to the top of Pikes Peak in the narrow mountain air. The switchbacks were so narrow and sharp that horses would panic and wagons would roll back or right over the edge, destroying themselves. Though risky, the spectacular mountain views warranted the good money that tourists paid to take the thrilling ride. On September 14, 1904, outlaw John Sontag was shot dead and photographed as he was dying. Sontag and his accomplice Chris Evans were railroad thieves who engaged in a legendary gun battle with the lawmen who were after them. It was also a custom to take photographs of dead or dying outlaws as a demonstration that they had been killed. These bloody images were usually bought as souvenirs or postcards to feed the interest of people towards the well-known criminals. In 1875, this was the camp of miners working the North Star and the Mountaineer Lodes in the San Juan County of Colorado. One of the most inhospitable and unpleasant places to reside in the whole West were the high-altitude mining camps. Miners were subjected to freezing, fatal avalanches, and total seclusion searching to find gold and silver in hopeless state. During brief summer months, supplies were to be packed in by mule, and in winter camp was absolutely cut off. During the Black Hills Gold Rush, Deadwood, Dakota Territory was a gold rush town that was booming in 1876. Deadwood grew to be a place of violence, gambling, and legendary personalities, such as Wild Bill Hickok and Calamity Jane, who spent their days there. In August of 1876, Wild Bill was killed in Deadwood when he was playing poker in a saloon. The town expanded out of nothing to thousands of people in months, and fortunes were being made and lost every day. A family stands outside their home in New Mexico in 1895 with a Native American servant holding their child. This photograph reveals the uncomfortable reality that some Native Americans, especially women and children, worked as servants or were held in near-slavery conditions. After military defeat, many Native people had no choice but to work for white families to survive. The power dynamics and treatment of Native servants was often exploitative and rarely honestly documented. In Hazen, Nevada, 1905, the saloons and the disreputable places were lined up in the street. The number of saloons in some small frontier towns was frequently more than all other forms of business put together. Hazen was a railroad station where laborers, cowboys, and travelers drank hard, gambled, and frequented brothels. These unsophisticated settlements helped frontier cities earn their wild reputations, and fights, shootings, and violence were the order of the day. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on anything.